Ladies and gentlemen, welcome along to Too Many Games. Today we are cracking into learning more about how to play Epic Armageddon, and we will be starting with the basics. It's my intention that with these videos we will go through how to play Epic Armageddon, and you will get a feel for the rules by watching along. If you already know the rules, hopefully it'll be a refresher, or maybe you'll see something that perhaps you've missed before. So let's start with the basics, with the units. This is the first place we want to start, as the miniatures in Epic Armageddon is what probably attracts most people to the game, and it's such a draw card into the hobby for lots and lots of people. So let's have a look at the different unit types that can be included in an army. The first one is the infantry, shortened down to INF. These can represent regular troops like Space Marines, Imperial Guardsmen, Orc Boys, Eldar Guardians, etc., etc. They are the standard type of trooper. Generally, they are a group of smaller miniatures all on the one base, and we'll look at some guidelines for that in a minute. But generally, it's 3 to 7 miniatures all on that one base. They don't have to be basic humanoid infantry. They may be cavalry, like Rough Riders, or they could be jet bikes. Now, although there are a number of miniatures glued on the one base, it only counts as one unit. For example, 5 Space Marines on a single base is 1 unit of Space Marines. Armoured vehicles, they are the other primary type that you will see used, shortened down to AV. Generally, this is like a tank or an APC or a grav tank, something similar to that. They are just a single miniature, and sometimes on a base, though sometimes not. It just depends on the players, really. So everyone playing Epic Armageddon has to follow some basic guides when building stands of miniatures. A stand simply means a base with a group of models on it. There are guidelines for how big these can be and how many miniatures you have to have on them, just to bring some conformity between different players and their armies. Firstly, the size. A stand can only be 40 millimeters wide in any direction. It could be 40 millimeters by 40 millimeters in a square, but the maximum width is 40 millimeters. Also, the minimum width that a stand can be in any direction is 5 millimeters. So no small 5 millimeter by 5 millimeter bases or 40 millimeters in one direction by 3 millimeters. Just keep it inside these limits and you won't go too wrong. Secondly, on the size, one direction must be at least 20 millimeters in width. You can choose which, but it means that you have to have at least one 20 millimeter by 5 millimeter base if you go by these guidelines. So what about the number of miniatures on the stand itself? How many do you need? The good news is that it's pretty flexible, so you have some wriggle room here, which can help you if you're limited in the number of miniatures that you actually have. It differs for the different types of infantry that you might have on the stand. And yes, generally it is infantry of some sort that'll be on a stand. So regular infantry need between 3 and 7 miniatures on the base. That forms a stand. Most people do squads of 5 that I've seen, but sometimes that can be different. If it is a mounted infantry like cavalry or bikes, then the guidelines are between 2 and 4 miniatures on a base. Lastly, if it's a stand of artillery that you have, then you need to do 1 to 2 miniatures per stand. Just some pretty basic ideas there, and you may have played differently with your friends, but these are just help keep everything a little bit uniform between different players. Let's move into unit data sheets. So now that we have all these units of infantry and vehicles, what do they do and how are they different? And this is a good time to look at the data sheets that are available for every unit in the game. These will give you all the information you need to use a unit in the game. So let's have a look with 2 examples from the Space Marine Army list. Firstly, in a data sheet, we have the name. So here we have the Tactical Marines and the Terminators. This is just literally the name or the label of the unit. Nice and easy. Secondly, we have the type of unit. Now, there are a few types that can be listed here, but usually it will be infantry and the armored vehicles that we've already seen. But you can also have light vehicles, which is a hybrid of those 2 units. There's also war engines, which are usually your bigger toys that you'll get to play with in Epic. More on them later. On top of that, there are also aircraft and spaceships, but again, we'll look at them later when we go through their rules. Both the Tacticals and the Terminators are infantry here in this example. Following that, we have the speed of the unit. This is the maximum movement distance of the unit in centimeters for each move that the unit makes. Here, both these units move 15 centimeters per move, which is a pretty standard move for most infantry. Following this, we have the armor of the unit, and this is always represented by a number with a plus after it, unless it just has a dash, in which case there is no armor. This represents the number that you have to equal or exceed on a dice roll to protect the unit when it gets hit by an attack. Therefore, a lower number here is better. Here in this example, both units save on a 4+, meaning that every 4 or more on a die roll will be successful if you have to make an armor save. Then we have the close combat statistics of the unit. This tells us how proficient this unit is when fighting against the enemy in hand-to-hand combat, which is in base-to-base contact in this game. Lower is better here again because it is another dice roll that you're trying to succeed. So here the Terminators are 3+, meaning they hit on any dice roll that rolls 3 or more, whereas the Tacticals are a little less proficient in close combat, and they hit on a 4 or more. After that, we have the Firefight value of the unit, which is very similar to the close combat value. However, this represents how good the unit is at fighting at close ranges, but not directly in hand-to-hand combat, like a short-range shootout, or firefight as the name suggests. Finally, the good stuff, the weapons that the unit is carrying. This gets a little trickier, and we'll explain more as we get further into the rules. But here we can see that the Tacticals have a missile launcher. This means they can fire with this missile launcher at the enemy. The Terminators have 2 assault cannons in their unit, meaning they get to fire twice at the enemy generally. And they also have a power fist, which is a close combat special attack. Then comes the range. Now, this is essentially attached to the weapon that's on the same line with it. This tells us how far the unit can fire their weapons. If you have a look here in the example, the missile launcher fires further than the assault cannons because it reaches out to 45 centimeters, whereas the assault cannons just have a 30 centimeter range. But if you look at the power weapons that are listed with a BC in their range column, you'll see that this means base contact, meaning you cannot shoot this weapon at range, but just to use it in close combat, and it usually will provide special rules in close combat. After this is the firepower section of the datasheet, which again is attached to the weapon that preceded it in the row. It tells you what dice roll you need to equal or beat in order to score a hit with that weapon. We will look at this more in the shooting and the assault section of the rules. But here you can see AP values and AT values, and they simply differentiate how easy it is to score a hit against infantry targets. That's the AP value, anti-personnel that stands for, and armoured vehicle targets, which is the AV, anti-vehicle, respectively. The missile launcher here hits an infantry target on a 5 or more on a dice roll, and an armoured vehicle on a 6 or more, making infantry seem like a better target for the missile launcher. The assault cannon, on the other hand, hits both infantry and vehicles on a 5+, so both targets are equally as good. The power weapon again is a bit different, as being an assault weapon, it cannot be used except when in assault and in base contact. It also has some letters there that denote some rules for it, but once again we'll explore more on that soon. Last but definitely not least, we have the notes section that comes on a unit datasheet. This simply tells us anything we need to know about the unit, namely special rules. In this example, the Tacticals have none, as they are a pretty standard unit, so the notes don't even appear in their list, in their section. The Terminators, being a more elite unit, have a number of special rules, and if you see listed there in the example, they have reinforced armor, they have the teleport special rule, and the thick rear armor special rule. Again, we'll explore all of those in due time. As you play more and you build lists more, you'll eventually be very proficient at reading these data sheets, and it will make sense, and you'll be able to determine what combat role a unit will be proficient in just going off its data sheet. Okay, so welcome along to FAQ time. In these videos, as we come across the official FAQs for a particular section, I want to highlight them to help answer some of the questions that might come up often. We have two FAQs around the unit data sheets. The first one, what is the difference between and or designations on weapons? This is basically asking that if you see a weapon profile that seems to have a big or a big and written there, and it's on multiple lines, what does that actually signify? And the answer to that is a weapon designated as or may choose between the modes of fire on the data sheet each time it is used. So there is an option there for how you will fire that weapon. A weapon designated as and may use all modes of fire simultaneously each time it is used. So any weapon that says or can choose which mode and therefore which profile to use each time you shoot, and any weapon with and gets to use all the profiles it has for that weapon, meaning that when it fires, it could do a number of things. Okay, next up, the other question. Some units can be armed with one weapon or another. When are these chosen? So this question is a little different to the one above, as it doesn't refer to the or of how a weapon fires, but rather the options that a unit may have on which weapons it can take. Maybe it's this gun or it's that gun. Some units have rules that say things like take 0 to 1 of these weapons and 1 to 2 of these weapons. You need to make a choice as to how many of each weapon you take. So when do you choose the armament of that unit? It might seem obvious, but the answer to that is when both players pick their armies. So when you build your army before the game, just make your selections on weapons then if you get to choose them. It's always a good idea, I think, to clearly let your opponent know before the game of your choices on these, or have it marked down, written down. It's this kind of, if this kind of choice is needed, it'll say so in the notes section generally of that unit. These questions here may not make much sense if you're just learning the rules, but later on it'll be clear why these questions have been asked. Formations. So let's have a quick look at formations now. Simply put, a formation is a group of units. Sometimes they might be called a company or a platoon or something like that, but everything in the game counts as a formation. All units belong to a formation, essentially. So there's no minimum to that. A single unit being used by itself in the game is still a formation. It's just a formation with one unit in it. One of the most important things with formations is how they are placed on the board. Every unit in the formation must be within 5 centimeters of at least one other unit in the same formation. So in essence, they need to stay near each other. You can spread them out, but each unit must be within 5 centimeters of one other unit in the formation. Think of it like a chain. You can spread out the formation, but each unit must chain to the next unit in the formation. If this chain gets broken, usually by units being destroyed from taking fire, then the next time the unit activates, it must do an action that can allow it to fix up the gaps so that all units in the formation are back within 5 centimeters. It can be risky to spread really thin, as it can limit your action choice if you need to select an action that moves your units back into a legal spacing in your formation. Okay, let's have a look at initiative values now. So every formation in the game also has an initiative value. This demonstrates how disciplined and responsive the units in the formation are to taking orders, and determines how well they'll perform on the battlefield. A lower value is better here once again. So for example, the Space Marines are a 1+, demonstrating that they are highly trained, disciplined, and flexible on the battlefield. Orcs, however, have a 3+, so they are less disciplined, and they're harder to control on the battlefield, as you might imagine. The initiative value of a formation is pretty important in the game, as it's mainly used when activating a formation each turn to do an action. And there's also used to rally a formation to help it get back into the fight or to stay in the fight even longer. So it's a very important part of a unit. And in an army, you may have different initiative values for different formations too. So some may activate easier than others depending on the quality or perhaps the importance of that formation. Blast markers. Lastly, for this video, let's have a look at blast markers. Formations in Epic will essentially collect blast markers during a game as they come under fire and they suffer losses in the game. These blast markers represent the morale, but also the effectiveness of that formation in combat. The more they have, the worse they will operate in game generally. Every formation can receive them as things happen to them. So when do you receive them on a formation? Firstly, every time a unit is shot at, this is regardless of any damage that's done to them, just the act of coming under fire will cause one blast marker to be added to the formation being shot at. Secondly, for every unit that is destroyed in the formation, it will cause one blast marker to be added to that formation. And this happens regardless of whether the losses are suffered from enemy fire or in an assault. It just might determine when they get added, but all casualties will add a blast marker. And lastly, when you attempt an action, and you have to do an action test with that formation, if you fail that test, then you will add a blast marker to that formation as a result of the failure. There are other ways to add blast markers to a formation, but these are the primary ways that you'll be adding blast markers to your formations or the enemies. What is the best way to track how many blast markers a formation has? The main ways to do it are either with counters placed next to the formation, although I find that can get out of hand a bit too easy if there's too many to add to the formation, particularly on bigger formations. It could take 10, 15 blast markers. I find it more helpful to use dice to mark those blast markers on the unit. Place a die near the formation and increase that number every time a blast marker is added to the formation. A tip that I have is to use a different type and a different color of die so that you don't accidentally pick it up when you're making an attack roll with a unit. So what effect do these blast markers have on a formation? Why are they important? The first thing is that the formation will suffer suppression from blast markers. Every blast marker on the formation will prevent a single unit from shooting when it attempts to fire on the enemy. 3 blast markers means that 3 units cannot shoot if that formation fires on an enemy formation. So it reduces the effectiveness of that unit in combat. Secondly, blast markers can break the formation and force them to withdraw from the fight. This occurs when the number of blast markers on the formation is equal to the number of units remaining in the formation. So 10 blast markers will break a formation that currently has 10 units left in it. Some formations will have special rules that change the number required, but again, we'll have a look at that in the special rules section. Thirdly, blast markers make it harder to activate a given formation. If a formation has any number of blast markers on it, then it suffers a -1 to the activation roll, meaning that you're more likely to fail that activation roll and be less flexible in the actions that you can choose when you're activating that unit. And finally, blast markers can affect the outcomes of any assault that formation is in. If you have blast markers on your formation, you will give certain bonuses to the enemy in an assault, and you're more likely to lose as a result, particularly if they have no blast markers and you have blast markers. Thanks for watching today as we explore more of Epic Armageddon. Hopefully you got a bit of an understanding of some of the basic building blocks in Epic Armageddon, like units and formations, as we went through this video. In the next video, we'll look at how the game turn works as you play Epic Armageddon. Feel free to like and subscribe if you want to see the rest in this series. See you next time on Too Many Games.